As the Roman Empire progressed into the more modern era, you'll be reading in your textbook about a series of sort of bewildering changes in the way in which Rome operated between about 14 of the Common Era, with the death of Augustus, and the successors to him. And what you're going to see is that throughout that time period, there were a lot of Roman emperors who came and went. There were some years where there was great instability, but increasingly what's happening is the way in which emperors are chosen are generally, they are military leaders, and that they are going to be the ones who will assert their power. One of the more famous ones in the time period will be Marcus Aurelius, who was a very dedicated, very serious emperor, and a very devout Stoic, in the sense that he followed the philosophy of Zeno and was very serious in his time frame of trying to bring his duty to the Roman Empire. We want to kind of fast forward to that time frame, not that we're going to skip it and dismiss it as inconsequential, but as we're looking at the highlights of where we're going to try and see the real tough origins of some of the things in Western civilization, I'd like to take us to the time period of Emperor Diocletian, who is ruling in the era at the end of the 3rd century and the beginning of the 4th century. He is, by his background, essentially a military warrior. He's from a very obscure background in what you know as modern-day Croatia. He's not one of those Roman blue bloods. He wasn't from the traditional senatorial class. He was the ultimate sort of soldier's soldier and got to be in charge of the Roman Empire as a relatively brutal but effective military leader. Diocletian, though, is also smart enough to recognize that the empire has just gotten too large. Thinking about the segment we just watched, Rome had been, remember, as an empire, increasingly kind of being breaking into pieces along the language line between the Latin and the Greek domination. Also, between the Western, which is relatively poor and more agricultural areas with very few cities, as opposed to the Greek wealthy urban areas of the eastern part of the empire. So Diocletian, realizing that the empire is so large and it's just physically difficult to rule, is going to set up what's called the rule of the four. In your textbook, they may refer to this as the tetrarchy. That means the rule of the four. Okay? It is simply an idea that he had where what he was going to do was he was going to take a look at the ideas of how to erase all the different pieces of Rome and make them work together. So what his idea is to take his empire, chop it into 4 pieces with 4 separate rulers who would all understand who's the chief one and who's responsible to whom. And in essence, he's going to create a sort of a Roman Empire by committee kind of government. Now, he's going to maintain himself as the chief military and political officer, but he's going to be looking for the idea that he could divide up power, still be obeyed, and then as he transitioned, then somebody else could take the next post of office and try to start up sort of a series of successors. One thing he had seen in the earlier Roman Empire period was lots and lots of bloody battles between families, between military leaders. He's trying to provide some kind of stability. So his real goal here is to find some kind of way to keep the empire stable, keep it operating as best he can without too many wild swings back and forth between any aspects of government or power. And the way he's going to do that is he's thinking in terms of stability. And let's see how he's going to try and do that. First of all, he thinks that the way he can help provide stability is to do something like this. He says, for example, that he's going to pass a government decree that sets the minimum and maximum prices for goods in the marketplace. In other words, he has an understanding that inflation, prices of goods and services always costing more, he realizes that inflation is a bad thing in the economy. So his example is he's just going to say, okay, the price of a loaf of bread is X and the price of a bottle of wine is Y, and that's it. Now, that's really unrealistic. It's kind of naive about how economics works, but this is the mentality he has. He's trying to provide stability. He's trying to make sure that things stay the same, so he's just going to declare that prices will stay the same. It fails. It does not work, but the idea is interesting, that he is believing that he, as an all-powerful emperor, can dictate these things and they will just come true. No need for any warning of the bureaucracy or bringing other partners online. Simply just say it and it will happen. Another thing he tries, just to help us understand what he's up to, he declares that, let's say your father is a baker and you are the baker's son and you're the only son in the family. he's going to declare that you're going to become a baker. That the economic stability of having somebody fill every position will take away some of the uncertainty in the economy. And so essentially, he's going to declare that if you are the son of a potter or the son of a baker, you will become what your father is. Now, that's an interesting statement on trying to create stability, but once again, it's not very economically savvy. It doesn't seem to make any sense to sort of program somebody into doing exactly what their parents do. Well, for most people, that's kind of a no-go. That's a game over kind of a thing. Not going to become exactly like my parent. But the idea that he has is that this is somehow going to supply stability. He also, though, is increasing the amount of taxation expected of all Roman citizens, really squeezing them for as much revenue as possible, especially the people who are in charge of some of the urban areas, some of the people who run the urban offices of politics. He's enforcing on these groups the necessity of collecting and delivering a high volume of taxes in a time of economic shrinkage and outright recession in many areas. The demands of his military and the demands of his governmental systems are such that he's essentially taxing his economy into the toilet, into an area where it's just not going to function effectively and will be a very bad thing for everybody. On top of that, think about this. Remember, within Rome and the Roman ideas of religion and concepts of religion, polytheism, the ability of anybody to believe in any god or goddess they wished, was tolerated in Rome, as long as it was public and ritualistic. Romans usually were very good at adopting the faith beliefs of all the people they conquered in bits and pieces, right? The prevailing Greek gods and goddesses that we know lived on Mount Olympus in the Greek culture. The Romans adopt all 12 of those, rename them. Zeus becomes Jupiter. Ares becomes Mars. Aphrodite becomes Venus. Okay? All these things are taken from the Greeks as models, and then now are just simply converted with Latin terms, and the same stories roll over. Well, the Romans had done that with other religious beliefs as well. We see lots of symbols and lots of priesthoods and lots of temples to various kinds of religious faiths, all within the Roman Empire, all under the authority of the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest. That was the title that had existed in Rome for a long time, and the one that Caesar Augustus had taken while he was alive up until the year 14 of the Common Era, making then the Roman emperor also the chief priest of all state religions. So the connection between religious faith and politics is not happenstance, it's not random, it's something that's already built into the Roman example. In this case, many people within the late 2nd into the 3rd centuries of the Roman Empire had started to suspect that Christianity was a devious cult, that it was something untoward, unnatural, and there are a series of edicts, commands within the Roman system of government to go and find Christians, to interrogate them, and if they refuse to follow the religious beliefs of the Roman system, essentially be declared treason or treasonous persons, and because they won't religiously follow the faith of the emperors, be executed for their failure. Remember, Julius Caesar and of course his adopted son Caesar Augustus had this idea that they were linked to the divines. Well, in subsequent years with other emperors, they went straight to the point of saying just the Roman emperor is a god and is worthy of being worshipped as part of the religious cults of all Roman citizens in all areas of the Roman Empire. That's going to cause a problem for a lot of religious faiths. The idea of worshiping the current emperor as a god is going to be very difficult for many people. If the Romans ever push this issue, and they do on several monotheistic beliefs like Zoroastrian groups, Jewish groups, and Christian groups later, there's a potential problem there, and we'll get back to that in time. But what's happening here is Diocletian is going to be one of the last emperors to have a systematic attempt at exterminating and undermining Christianity as a way to go back in time and as a way to think about how they are going to recreate the old. So in the time period that's happening, though, there's lots of changes. The Christian community is growing larger, it's growing more powerful and wealthy, it's attracting more and more people, and in this kind of old environment here, you can see that now not only is the leader of the Roman state, the emperor, not only crowned and bedecked with jewels, showing all the power and authority, you'll also see a very obvious sign of Christianity linked directly to the emperor. This is going to be something that's going to be happening in the next century with the rise of Constantine the Great as the emperor of Rome. Quickly put, Augustus had left behind a system, after he died in 14, of emperors who essentially competed militarily with each other for favor and authority. That system had gone on for quite some time. Diocletian had sort of been the capstone of that environment, where the strongest military man gets to run the entire show. Constantine was one of the people brought into that tetrarchy system that Diocletian had created, so that Constantine is already on the sort of stairway to stardom, if you want to put it that way, in terms of already being at the top of Roman society. He is familiar with Christianity. It appears as if his mother was a practicing Christian. He's worked with lots of different Christians in the army and in various other areas of influence. He himself seems to be devoted more and more to the idea of a sun god, that his chief understanding of deities is that the sun god in his world is the chief god of all the others. So he has lots of religious belief systems surrounding him. He has many of his own, and so it's intriguing to look at him and see what is he going to do with this Christian community that just a few generations ago was essentially an illegal cult that was in many ways seen as treasonous and that had been prosecuted by the Roman authorities. Now he's on the edge of great power. How is he going to deal with the Christian community? When he is involved in military battles, Constantine is expanding his power against the other Roman political officials who could threaten him. And there's a key element that's interesting here. He goes into a military battle just outside of the city of Rome in the year 312. And the way the story goes, he saw a vision in the sky. He had a dream that he saw a vision in the sky. Now remember, in traditional Roman society, the idea of the gods or goddesses providing information to people is very common, right? Through oracles, through divination, through all different very kinds of physical means of transferring information. We saw that in other places like Greek religion at the oracle at Delphi. Okay, so this is not a new concept, or even just the Hebrew concept that Yahweh had given ideas to the prophets that would then, of course, be spread to the people, that a person would be chosen to receive a message. Okay, it's very common in many of the cultures here that we've been talking about so far. Nothing different here. Constantine claims at some point to have had a vision and a dream. And in his vision, in the night before this battle, it was this idea that somehow some version of a cross was seen in the sky by him in his dream, with the idea that somehow by this sign you will conquer. Essentially, that's what he's saying. So he takes this as sort of like a premonition or a sign from the divines. He has his soldiers then put a cross someplace on themselves at the day of the battle. They win the battle at a place called Milvian Bridge. And that sort of seems to be a kind of a watershed moment for Constantine. He has now had some direct sort of appeal from the Christian groups around him for his moral authority and for him to convert himself. He's now had this dream where it looks like the Christian God was aiding his soldiers in this battle against an enemy. He's going to take a look at this idea, and more intriguingly, the very next year, put out what's called the Edict of Milan in the year 313. It's a very simple order. The Roman emperor, and with some other officials, declare that the real estate and the practices of Christians are now in the same equal footing as all the other religions of Rome. Remember, the idea of what was called the Pontifex Maximus, or the chief priest of Rome, was this idea that the Roman emperor was in charge of state religious faith, in charge of maintaining temples and things like that. Well, using that same old authority, Constantine now is saying that as the chief priest of Rome, he can declare that Christianity is not some sort of outlaw cult, but instead can be accepted at the same level as all the other religions in Rome. He is not making Christianity the exclusive religion of Rome. He is putting it on the same equal economic and political basis as all the other religions. And traditionally in Rome, that means that religious real estate is not subject to taxation. So religious real estate in the old Roman Empire was seen as non-taxable. You'll see then for a second, if you think about this, Constantine in the year 313, by claiming that the Christian religion is equal to the other religions of Rome, and it has tax exemption. For those of us who live in modern America, think about it. The vast majority of official groups that are accepted as religions are registered with the IRS, and their real estate is tax exempt. If you want to look for the origins of that idea, you can find it right here. Another thing that's interesting in the time period of Constantine is that increasingly Christianity is becoming more and more acceptable. It's not seen as an illegal, crazy cult. Many early Romans, when they thought about Christianity, thought of it in terms of a cannibalistic, secretive religion because they met by invitation only behind closed doors to conduct this mysterious ceremony called the Eucharist, the Last Supper being reenacted from their understanding of Christ. This was the outside version of what Romans understood. They also understood that Christianity had this concept called baptism, which would wash away all sin. So the prejudices against Christianity are that many Romans don't really understand what it is. They see what they think they see, and they convert it into what they know. But inside the Christian community, which is in many ways been secretive because it was illegal, it's now going to be coming out more and more into the public, and that means that all the kind of belief systems and the categorization of what is a true Christian or not, exactly how the books of the Bible operate, those were ideas that had been kept kind of quiet because there was no public unified force interested in standardizing the Christian belief system, let alone the scriptures. So, as Constantine becomes more powerful and increasingly gets involved with Christians at the level of the army and of the government, he is now going to have to start to take a look at what he can do. Now, Constantine, remember, had invested a massive amount of money in creating his own city. There is a small city in what you know was modern-day Turkey. It was called Byzantium back then. Constantine is going to take this small village and then create a city and name it after himself called Constantinople. All right? That is the modern-day city of Istanbul, if you're thinking where we're talking about. But he makes a city out of a village, and he names it after himself. And that's because he's moving the power from the old Rome on the Italian peninsula to areas where there's great wealth and promise. And like we had talked about earlier, the areas of the Greek Empire, the urban wealthy empire of the eastern side of Rome had been attracting a lot more influence and power. Constantine goes to where the power is. Part of that process, though, is he needs to help the Christians understand what exactly is Christianity. What are the books of the Bible? What are the proper belief systems? And this is an interesting thing. He calls together as many Christian bishops as he can at a place called Nicaea. It's a palace that Constantine controls. In the year 325, he asked major churchmen to come together and come to some strict and very simple and clear understandings of what Christianity is all about. And coming out of this group is what's going to be called the Nicene Creed. It is a direct, very simple, and very, very powerful statement of the Christian community of what they believe and what they do not believe. But notice here, it was put together and sort of formulated by the direct interest of the Emperor Constantine, who is a political authority. This is going to make it, remember, interesting. The Roman Empire already has a context where the Roman Emperor controls religion. Now we have a Roman Emperor bringing in his own power and authority to direct the Christian movement to sort of organize and say what it is. Will that mean that he'll stop interfering? Does that mean that he's going to continue to interfere in the affairs of the church? We do not know yet. But as we move forward, what's going to be happening is that the Christian movement and its ideas will be increasingly powerful in the creation of this late Roman Empire state. And we're also going to have to take a look at the idea of how that religious group is going to define itself and spread its ideas. Be sure to carry through on your reading in this area of the text and take a look at any sample questions that can help you.